Good afternoon, Helsinki, and good afternoon, Kim.
Hi, Jean. Helsinki. Yes, I think people are coming in. Hi, how are you?
Very well.
What have you done today? What session?
Well, actually, I'm just back from the session on LGBTQ+.
Yes.
And it was such a wonderful call to action that I was not the only one with tears in my eyes after some of the presentations.
Oh,
so
wow.
very well done to all the speakers.
And you say, oh, that's good to hear. You say a call to action. What kind of action will you take?
Well, you know, in Flanders, in Belgium, I'm coordinating the working group of people with dementia, and we're trying to move forward on this topic as well. So that's really like the call to action that I'm taking back to Belgium.
You're taking it back to Belgium.
Exactly.
That's good to hear. It's good to hear, isn't it, Jean?
Absolutely, and fantastic, because we started straight away with asking you as our audience questions, because we definitely want to hear from you and not just talk at you. So what we want to hear from you is, what have you done at the conference so far?
Besides sleeping and eating. Right?
Or attending a fantastic LGBTQ session, which was apparently absolutely fantastic. So.
Let's see. So what are the options that they can choose from?
So the question was, and you can choose more than one option, whether you attended a plenary session, whether you had a presentation yourself, whether you participated in parallel sessions, whether you looked at posters, or whether you interacted and networked with other delegates. And at the moment, the top three attending plenary sessions, but at least one, this one already.
Yeah, and we like that. And and there's one here, of course. So are you in the app? What are you voting? What are you saying? She attended plenary sessions and she participated in a parallel session. Which one?
You can't remember, there are so many.
They don't know anymore, there are so many. Yes, who agrees that there are many sessions in this conference? Can I see a raise of hands? That there are a lot. Almost too hard to choose from?
Yes.
Yeah? Did you make a good choice for one?
I think so, and I'm looking forward to this section now.
Yeah, okay, will be the best, of course. Of course, the best so far. We're just improving and improving. Yes, Jean.
It definitely sounds as if people had difficulties choosing the right one, but looking at the kind of results, it's definitely people attending plenary sessions, participating in parallel sessions. We don't have that many people that actually presented themselves.
No?
So far, only 22 out of the audience that presented themselves. So more people listening and interacting with us rather than presenting themselves.
Yeah. So we would really love some people in the front. So you're all just arriving, but we would really love it because this is an empty ocean here. So we feel lonely, don't we, Jean?
Don't be afraid, definitely come closer.
We're so lonely. Please come forward. Also good for the speakers to have some people in the front. And we will not bother you. As you know, I will bother everybody everywhere all the time.
People might be afraid of audience participation by now, but you can come closer.
Yes, come closer.
Can definitely, because we want to hear from you as well.
And there's lots of activity on social media as well, right?
So we've heard people are actually using different social media.
Yes.
In the past it was very much Twitter, which is now X, but people are using Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. So it's really fantastic hearing from you. If you talk about the event, don't forget the hashtag 33AEC.
And if you search on Instagram or on LinkedIn on the hashtag 33AEC, you'll find all the messages of your conference attendants, friends.
Lots of photos of speakers, of people at posters.
Yeah.
So very interactive and a nice selection of what's been happening at the conference so far.
Yeah, exactly. So now, let's open our session officially. You see, everybody's talking and looking at their Instagram now. The new generation, Instagram generation. We're going to talk about intersectionality. Tell me about that word.
So what we've been trying to do with this session is really realizing that very often when we conduct research, when we conduct clinical trials, when we are developing services, when we're providing information, we are providing information for the majority populations in our society. And what we are very often forgetting or ignoring are underrepresented populations, so people from ethnic minorities, the LGBTQ plus community, people with other disabilities, people from the intellectual disability background, and also very often the people that are attending these conferences and are participating in research are reasonably well-off people financially. So also these represented people we would really like to involve in this session.
With less money, less opportunities, things like that. And we were just talking and we thought maybe we will find out even another group in the coming years that we now don't reflect or know about or didn't think about enough, because that's probably the case, not enough, right?
And also I think it will depend on the countries which are the groups that we need to reach out more. Because some countries are very successful in reaching out to some underrepresented groups and less so in others. But I think there's no country that has solved this, and a lot of countries need to learn from what we will be hearing in this session later.
Yes, okay. So we're talking about a few groups that could be represented more and find out more how to do that and what they stand for. So our first speaker, can I introduce you?
Or we can actually have another polling question, so if you could go to the next one.
Yes.
Because we are talking that we would like to reach out to underrepresented groups. So here's a question. Do you belong to any of these underrepresented groups? Do you belong to a minority ethnic group or religion? Do you belong to the LGBTQ plus community? Are you part of people with other disabilities or an economically disadvantaged group? Or is it none of the above? That's also an opportunity. It could also be that you belong to a number of these underrepresented groups. So unfortunately, we will make you choose one of those groups.
Who or what you are, where you're from. Interesting. Okay, the economically disadvantaged group, there are not many people here who say, well, I'm challenged in that way. It makes sense. Otherwise, it would be difficult to travel here.
But very interesting, we have more than 100 people that have participated in this polling, and 71 feel that they are not belonging to any of these disadvantaged groups. So it's interesting for us to know that of the audience, only about 29% are actually from the kind of groups that we want to make sure we reach out more to. So there's probably a lot of work to be done. And we have fantastic speakers to tell us what we should do.
Yes, exactly. So we have a lot to learn. There's a big group that needs to learn also. That's a good thing. Our first speaker is Karan Jutlla. Oh, my. Sorry, okay. And she is the head of Health Research Center and also the dementia lead at the University of Wolverhampton. Yes, Wolverhampton. And she has a passion for cultural inclusivity and in dementia care, a researcher, educator, and you really specialized in this field, didn't you? She's ready to go because she knows she has 50 minutes to speak. She wants to say a lot. She's like this in her chair. Okay, people, give it up for Karan Jutlla.
Oh, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Can I check you can all hear me okay? Fabulous. If I move away from the mic, just wave at me, please, because I have a tendency to move around. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Alzheimer's Europe, for inviting me to this beautiful city in Finland to talk about cultural inclusivity in dementia care. It's a real honour to be here. In the next 15 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is define equality, diversity and inclusion and how this links to the concept of intersectionality, because I recognise that not everybody is familiar with these terms. I'd like you to consider how culturally inclusive dementia care can be achieved via a person-centred approach and recognise the importance of co-production. So, equality, diversity and inclusion, or as known in other countries as diversity, equity and inclusion, refers to ensuring fair treatment and opportunity for all. Now, in the 15 years that I've been delivering education and training in this area around cultural competency, I've often asked service providers and managers to tell me, how do you know that you're being inclusive? And you will be surprised, or you won't be surprised, at the amount of times they say to me, because we treat everybody the same. And as this image demonstrates, treating everybody the same puts people with certain characteristics at an unfair disadvantage. Equity, on the other hand, involves making the necessary adaptations and adjustments required to ensure that everybody has a fair chance to whatever the set goal or activity is. And whilst we're now working towards more equitable services, what we ought to be doing is identifying the actual cause of that inequity and removing systemic barriers to achieve true liberation or justice. Sadly, the reality of the world that we live in is where one tends to get more than what is required, whilst others tend to get less of what is required. And we see this from the evidence base because there are huge disparities in the way that certain groups of people access and experience dementia care services. So in the UK, historically, we know that people can experience unfair disadvantage or discrimination based on all of these protected characteristics. And we have the Equality Act 2010 to protect people from unlawful discrimination. And within this Equality Act, it also covers socio-economic disadvantages too. Now, because of the physical disabilities and the cognitive disabilities that are associated with dementia, people who are diagnosed with the condition also fall under the Equality Act. However, it's not as simple as being discriminated against or experiencing some form of unfair disadvantage because of one characteristic. So you could be somebody diagnosed with dementia, you could also be a person of colour, and you could also be somebody who's not heterosexual, therefore experiencing discrimination in a number of ways for a number of different reasons. And this concept is what we call intersectionality. It's where people have multiple elements of their identity that make them experience various different forms of discrimination. Now, although I'm focusing on ethnic minority communities to touch upon culture and race, I encourage you to keep this in mind. So very briefly, to set the context, what's the evidence base when we think about ethnic minorities? Now, in England and Wales, we know that we have rising numbers of people who are expected to develop dementia from ethnic minorities, and I know that it's been estimated at nearly 6.5% of the population across Europe. We know that there are higher risk factors associated with certain communities. We know that there are lower levels of knowledge and awareness about dementia, and this was covered in a really interesting session that I chaired this morning on ethnic minority groups, about how there is no word that translates to dementia for certain communities, and how in some communities the word dementia, when pronounced in mother tongue, can actually have quite a derogatory meaning to it. Because of the lack of awareness about dementia, people interpret it as a mental health condition rather than a neurological disorder, and with that comes the stigma. Because of that, we see low dementia diagnosis with people presenting themselves in real crisis situations, so a huge need for early intervention. We know from the literature, people who have been doing research in this area, that we don't have assessment tools that are culturally appropriate, which causes some inconsistencies with diagnosis. We know that there's a lack of culturally inclusive dementia care services and very few psychosocial interventions that are culturally appropriate for people. And because of all of these issues, family carers, informal carers are very much the resources for people caring for a loved one with dementia in these communities, with huge cases of isolation, loneliness and depression. From a service perspective, there's still that real fear of the unknown. I still see it when delivering education and training. People not feeling confident in this area, frightened about being politically correct in case they say the wrong thing. There's still assumptions about community support, so people often say, but they look after their own, don't they, with certain communities. Huge reliance on family for information, and language is seen as the biggest barrier. Now, from the community perspective, I'm going to share a couple of quotes from recent projects that I've done to emphasise where people really talk about this notion of one size does not fit all. So here, Balvinder Kaur, which is a pseudonym, said, I still can't believe that services still think that all Asian people are the same. They sent me a Gujarati-speaking care worker when my mum speaks Punjabi. They are two completely different languages, but in their eyes, we are South Asian, and they sent me a South Asian care worker. And you know, my first job was as a care worker, and this used to happen to me all the time. They would say to me, Karan, go in and see to Mr. Bhattacharya. And I would say, Mr. Bhattacharya speaks Bangladeshi, and I speak Punjabi, and they're two completely different languages. So really trying to understand the layers and the diversity amongst one community of people. Here, Habant's Kaur removed her husband from daycare because she said when he used to go to daycare, they just assumed that he wanted Asian food and that he wouldn't be interested in the fish and chips they served every Friday. But we've always eaten fish and chips on a Friday. The children used to love it. Little things like this kept happening, and I felt bad for him. The intention here was good, but what happened in this scenario was because the previous two Asian men that had used the service preferred Asian food, there was an assumption that was made. And you can see in these scenarios here that what's happening is a real lack of communication. People are not asking the right questions to find out what the answers are, and because of that, people's needs aren't being met. So what do you do when you are in a community who has no understanding of dementia, you're in a family that doesn't understand dementia, you're trying to access services but you can't reach those services, and even when you do, they're not being culturally inclusive. What do we do in this scenario? And what do we do when there is so much diversity just within one community of people? How do we meet their needs? Let's take a look at the definition of cultural inclusion. This is an organisational effort and practices in which different groups or individuals having different backgrounds are culturally and socially accepted and welcomed. Now, you can't be culturally inclusive without being culturally competent, which is the process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, languages, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, religions, and other diversity factors in a manner that recognises, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, and communities, and protects and preserves the dignity of each. When we think about person-centred dementia care and the very definition of person-centred dementia care, which is about maintaining personhood, it's not that different from being culturally competent. If it's about giving people recognition, respect, and trust, then surely the two go hand in hand. I'd like to share with you an example, which is a real-life case scenario, and I was given permission by the care home manager to share this with you today. I was delivering training for a care home, and within the care home they had one Muslim resident who was the only Muslim resident in the care home, and she spoke very little English. So the care home manager, who was in the training session, decided that he would advertise for an Urdu-speaking care worker, because within that locality were quite a few Muslim people, and he wanted the care home to start to be inclusive. So they advertised for an Urdu-speaking care worker and were successful in the appointment of one, which is fantastic, and we want to see more of those things happening. Now, the Urdu-speaking care worker came in, and the Muslim resident liked a glass of wine on a Friday evening, and you can see what I'm going to say next. She told her that the wine is haram and she shouldn't drink it and she will go to hell. And the care home manager said to me, what did I do wrong in that scenario, Karan? And I said, just because you can speak somebody's language doesn't make you culturally competent. And that person needs cultural competency training. And this happens so much. I see this so much in services. So just defeating language barriers and bringing a diverse workforce in also brings with it cultural biases. Cultural competence is so much more than an awareness of cultural norms and defeating language barriers. It also requires cultural humility. This is a lifelong commitment to self-evaluation and the awareness that one's own culture is not the only one or the best one. And to do this, we have to reflect upon our own individual cultural biases and stereotypes, which goes a lot, it's more deeper rooted than just saying we can get people from the same community to provide care for people from within that same community. And I think some people will agree with me, but if you're working with people with a diagnosis of dementia, you need advanced communication skills to reach out to people. So saying that we can't speak somebody's language eventually is going to be an issue that has to be overcome, because a person might lose their ability to verbally communicate with you. So we really need advanced communication skills. And I'm highlighting here, and I hope I've made the point, that you really can't be person-centred without being culturally inclusive, and you can't be culturally inclusive without being person-centred, because each and every one of us in this room has our own value base, our own cultural norms, our own belief systems, and a need for our personhood to be maintained. So why is it, therefore, that inclusivity becomes a separate agenda, something that we do afterwards? It has to be part and parcel of everything that we do at the very, very beginning. In addition to person-centred care, we do need more funding in this area to develop resources. We need a diverse, skilled workforce, people skilled in person-centred care who are culturally competent. We need more diverse, skilled leaders who have a grassroots approach, who can design services and resources with people rather than for people. The way to know what people want when we are all different is to simply ask them what works and what they need. And this is how we give a sense of belonging and inclusion to people and help them really feel part of something. We need to share good practice, so we've produced a limited series in the Journal of Dementia Care. If anyone wants a copy, please do get in touch with me, but it will be available, at the end of October to download from the Journal of Dementia Care's website. And here there are lots of stories of all the successful projects that people have done, and I've also talked about an example of a project where we co-produced culturally inclusive resources for one communities, and how and why that was successful. Just to finish off, because I'm conscious of time, I've talked a little bit about reflection, and so just to end my presentation, I'd like you to reflect on a few questions. If you are providing a service or work with people from underrepresented communities, please take time to think about whether it's a true reflection of the local communities you serve. Does the environment bring a sense of belonging and inclusion? Are you practicing advanced communication skills, as language is not always verbal? Are you supporting personhood through meaningful, inclusive activity? Are you going the extra distance to find out what people want and need? Are you working with them to give them the support they need? And are you practicing self-reflection? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karan, for this introduction. If you can just stay for 1 second. We will be taking questions at the end. We'll have a discussion with all 4 speakers. But just one quick question from my side. What are the biggest barriers that you see when you want to implement person-centered and culturally inclusive care? Is it management? Is it policymakers? Is it care staff? Where are the biggest obstacles that you encounter?
I think they're at every level, Jean. No, I'm giving the honest answer. You know, if you have a diverse, skilled workforce who are care workers, who are very, very skilled, they need their leaders to support them and their managers to support them. And for the managers to be supported, they have to have national drivers and a reason to do it. So it has to go bottoms up and top down and work at every level in order for it to be effective.
So the answer is we need lots and sort of more Karens to make sure that the message that you have made very clear gets heard everywhere where it's needed. And I think our next speaker is going to talk about a different topic. We'll have Linn Sandberg. Linn Sandberg, who is an associate professor in gender issues and the principal investigator of a project on LGBTQ people with dementia and the Swedish dementia care system. And her presentation today is about the experiences and views of people with dementia from the LGBTQ plus community and integrated care in care provision. Over to you, Linn.
Thank you. I have not been instructed about this, but is it like that?
You just press
the green one, okay. Right. So, hello everyone, and it's a great honor to be here today. I'm really thrilled to be able to speak for this kind of audience, although I wasn't aware that I was going to speak in this big room, so it makes me a bit. But I just came for an amazing panel session on the LGBTQ plus issues in dementia, and I want to first of all say that if you're looking for some great people who are doing work in this area, do check out the names of the people who were part of this panel at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And if you missed that, I think you should get in touch with these people. And in particular, I want to sort of say that the work I'm doing and what I will be presenting today is something that I'm doing for Daiti and Patrick that was presenting this afternoon, queer people living with dementia who really is, you know, like having a fight here with heteronormativity and cisnormativity in dementia context, in care context. So I want to really acknowledge these people doing amazing work in this area. And today I will be speaking of some of the findings from a current project that I'm involved with on LGBTQ people with dementia and the Swedish dementia care. But hopefully this is not something that is just relevant to the Swedish context, but actually something that is for all of you to consider wherever you are in Europe. And I've named this the limits of person-centered care because I think that you were pointing to that person-centered care and can actually be, in some points, a bit challenging because it doesn't really acknowledge the intersectionality of people's lived experiences when living with dementia. And I would say that intersectionality actually is not just about looking to marginalized groups, but actually also turning the gaze towards privilege, power, who is sort of, you know, just looking at the audience who are here today, who are forging change in dementia care policy in different kinds of settings where people with dementia are at. So not just looking at marginalization, but also privilege. So the project that I'll be talking about today is aiming both at a policy perspective, how LGBTQ people are represented in legislation, guidelines, and policy. It also aims to explore the experiences of LGBTQ people with dementia and significant others, and that was what I was speaking about earlier this afternoon. And finally, the project seeks to investigate the experiences of dementia care staff. So that is what I will be speaking about today. And so the overall aim of this project is to explore the experiences and conditions of LGBTQ people with dementia in formal dementia care. And why is this important then? I mean, today when we talk about person-centered care, it's repeatedly represented as the hallmark of good care. But what we see in research is that gender and sexuality, including gender identity and sexual identities and orientations, are very rarely discussed as part of personhood. So as I was pointing to, there's an evident lack of intersectional analysis in dementia research, policy, and dementia care in general. So the catch-all phrase, people with dementia, doesn't quite sort of, you know, look to the specificities as you were rightly pointing to in people's lived experiences, and then including gender and sexuality, which we often find to be very integral to our personhood. And looking specifically at LGBTQ people with dementia is important also because existing research points to worries and concerns about LGBTQ people when entering into formal care, that dementia, that you will be discriminated, that you will face negative attitudes, and when living with dementia, there is a particular kind of concern about who you can be open to. You might fear outing, you might fear sort of, you know, not knowing, controlling your environment in different ways. And it's also important to note that LGBTQ people with dementia are more likely to reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, and 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes. So like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside in care homes, so like 50% of LGBTQ people with dementia reside when you're working in a care home, it's quite likely that you have queer people there, as we've seen in the earlier session, saying that queer people are actually everywhere. And it's also the case that LGBTQ people, to a lesser extent, have children, and they might be estranged from their families, which means also they, to a greater extent, have so-called families of choice, meaning that these families of choice might not actually be readily recognized by people. If you're not like a legal spouse, for example, that impacts on the possibilities of care, for example. So all in all, LGBTQ people with dementia face compounded stigma and being like both stigmatized from dementia and from non-normative gender and sexuality. And there's very little research in this area, as you can understand, and in particular when it comes to formal care. So the study we've conducted, it's based on focus groups and semi-structured interviews and vignettes featuring LGBTQ people with dementia. With care staff, we had 31 participants in this study, assisting nurses, specialist nurses, 2 doctors, and 2 occupational therapists. And we chose to involve vignettes because we thought there might be a case of people saying, look, we haven't seen any, we haven't met any, we haven't found any. And we wanted to use these vignettes to actually then talk about what are your sort of reasoning and reflection on, for example, the special needs, what is gender identity, what is sexuality in dementia care. And the people that we've interviewed in this particular sub-study, they were working in home services, in care homes, in daycare centers for people with dementia, and also in support teams. So going in a bit to moving into the findings of this study, one of the recurring themes was the, well, not surprising maybe for us, but the absence of experiences of caring for LGBTQ people with dementia who were known and open. And some interviewees were a bit self-critical, as in this quotation that you might see on the screen that says, it strikes me, I have been working a really long time. How come I haven't seen anything? Is it because I don't want to, or have people not dared to show that I like men or women, or I want to be dressed in a different way? Is it me who did not want to see it? I have nothing against it, absolutely not. So this kind of affirmation of tolerance was actually there. But the most recurring sort of explanation why people haven't met anyone was because interviewees said that people they cared to belonged to a generation who had been in the closet, who had lived tragic and repressed lives, and thus were not open and visible to them. And they also said that asking explicit questions about sexual orientation or gender identity was argued to be a potential breach of people's integrity and sometimes could result in bringing out bad feelings, which was regarded as particularly challenging when working with people with dementia, that they didn't want to upset or bring out sort of bad things for people in a very sort of vulnerable state. There were, however, occasional glimpses in the focus groups where they had experience of caring for people with dementia, but these were often very sort of stereotyped of repressed gays who suddenly expressed a male same-sex desire for another man. Trans people were mostly discussed as transvestites or men dressed as women. Other kind of trans experiences were very rarely acknowledged, and there was a great lack of knowledge on trans issues in particular. And it's also interesting to listen to these interviews when it comes to lesbian relationships, because they were very absent and invisible in the dementia care context. So although the interviewees on several occasions had witnessed intimacies between women in the dementia care, they did not see them as lesbian desires or relationships, but rather as friendly intimacies and expressions of skin hunger that they regarded as pervasive among people with dementia. And coming back to this treating everyone the same, that's something that was also recurring in our study. So when discussing how and if to raise LGBTQ issues in dementia care, participants often came back to, we treat everyone the same, and that labeling or talking about specificities or queer people was not appropriate and in line with person-centered care. And they also raised these concerns about raising questions that they did, as one of these interviewees says, everyone might not feel comfortable raising these issues. There are so many emotional, you fear asking because you're a bit afraid of the answer you get. and treating everyone the same, but at the same time then, you know, not asking any questions because that might be sensitive. We argue, however, that although these, well-meaning approaches, and in no way do we seek to sort of, you know, blame or say you're doing the wrong thing here, but we would like to sort of stress that these kind of approaches largely upheld heteronormativity, that everyone was assumed to be heterosexual and identifying as the gender they were assigned at birth, unless otherwise stated. So while care staff was simply waiting for people to come out so they could address LGBTQ issues, we saw in other parts of a study when we interviewed queer people with dementia that the act of coming out was often very difficult, and particularly when living with dementia in a formal care context, where one was dependent on care staff but also had limited possibilities for advocating for one's rights. So there is this waiting for people to come out, on the other hand, people not having this easy way of coming out in dementia care. And before I start concluding now, I'd also like to say something about the rather ambiguous way that sexuality and gender identity is featured among people with dementia in these narratives by care staff. On the one hand, dementia was understood as something that took away barriers and inhibitions, and that dementia then opened up to your true or inner selves, which meant that people would no longer be able to repress their sexual or gender identities. So, for example, one of the interviewees said, "I think it all disappears as your illness progresses and you're coming out of your shell." And another one said, "If you have a progressed dementia, you're losing these abilities to stop your inner feelings. So if there's a really strong feeling, we would have noticed if two women were holding hands or such." And they were old now, they grew up with other values and had to hide all their lives. But when you got dementia illness, those barriers fall, so to speak. It's the core that emerges. So on the one hand, you have this is a true self that emerges, from dementia. On the other hand, dementia was also seen as something that was a confused or unreliable kind of state, which was particularly seen in vignettes that we did. So when we had different cases with queer people with dementia in the vignettes, the care staff sometimes challenged these queer expressions among people with dementia and related them to states of confusion that came with their illness. So, for example, one of the interviewees said, "She might have been fabulating because of her illness. It may never have happened," talking about a lesbian relationship. That's the everyday life for us in dementia care. And another interviewee said, when talking about a gay man who sought to reconcile with his sexual partners or going back to gay clubs, "So I'm thinking like this, he has a dementia illness and lives in a care home. What of the things he speaks of are wishes and fantasies, and what has he really experienced? Could he have been to a gay club once, and that was the greatest? It could have been like that too. You don't really know what has happened." So as you can see, there's this ambiguity. On the one hand, it should take out the sort of true core. On the other hand, dementia is understood as not really reliable, and that queer experiences are then not seen as authentic. So in conclusion, what we saw in our study is pervasive heteronormativity. While people had the best of intentions and came back to statements such as "we treat all people the same," they also combined this with the wanting not to label people and felt that these were topics that were potentially sensitive because they had the impression that the people they were caring for were mostly had lived tragic or repressed kind of lives. So all these together upheld heteronormativity and contribute to a continued invisibility in dementia care. And it's also interesting to see that when people are talked about as confused or not really having authentic kind of sexual expressions, there's a sort of parallel discourse of queer people as being confused. You might recognize this historically and today, of gender confusion, of sexual confusion, you're trying out, it's a phase, those kind of things. So an unreliable kind of state that is associated often with LGBTQ people's sexualities or gender identities, and had this in this case then combines with dementia being regarded as unreliable, not trustworthy, and so on. So it seems here that person-centered care was interpreted by the participants in our study as not categorizing and not making anything specific, which then we argue results in overlooking the relevance of gender and sexuality in people's personhood and life courses. So I always feel like implication is, like telling people what to do is not really my thing, but I think that what I want to do with this presentation is obviously also to open up to discussion, because people you're working with in many different areas, in different countries, I think just opening up to that kind of discussion, how can we change this, is really important, and I'm not the one to tell you exactly what to do. But anyway, I think that for me, from this study and from what we see from previous research, is that heteronormativity needs to be challenged in dementia care, which also then obviously relates to policy and politics. And challenging heteronormativity means it's not about having people with dementia to come out to dementia care. We don't have to wait for people to tell what they are. But what we need is allow for people to express the diversity of gendered and sexual selves through dress, hair, furniture, or other objects. We might not even need continuity with the life course that has been before. There might actually be ways of exploring other ways of being when living with dementia that should be sort of open up to. Challenging heteronormativity is also about enabling queer life stories to be told, for example, via films, photos, and objects, and having queer relationships and life courses recognized and maintained. So obviously, I mean, knowledge and education, this is always what researchers are telling you, aren't they? Like, we need more knowledge, we need more education, everyone should be trained. And I don't say that that's not, it's very important, and you should all go out and see what kind of training and education that you can bring to where you are. But I would also like to stress that there is a need for a radical change in dementia care throughout Europe, where there needs to be more continuity, better working conditions, enabling staff to build trust and relationships, because we cannot have queer lives acknowledged if people are just running in and out and not having the work conditions to actually be able to give that kind of care. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. And if you want to, please email me if you want to learn more about what I'm doing and see the future publications coming.
And we will talk to you later, because you don't like giving advice or suggestions, but do you have an example of a country or maybe a city where you think that your suggestions are being implemented right now? A good example, or an organization?
I think that John Hammond was speaking today was like, he said that Brighton was a good place, so probably Brighton is the best place in Europe, and I don't know.
But we have to ask him why Brighton.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to hear you. John, you said? John?
John Hammond.
John Hammond, yeah. Yes, okay. And we have to know.
That was Brighton, or was it Bristol? I don't know, Bristol. I can't see the difference between the...
Yeah. What was it? Bristol?
Yeah,
Brighton.
okay.
Yes, we will find out all about Brighton.
Yeah, I think that's good, because, yeah.
Thank you so much, and we will talk to you later. Thank you so much, yes. Just to make you think a little, because it was so nice, because Karan already said what you need is real self-reflection, right? It's very important. And we would like to move on, the technical guys, to the next poll question. So let's shift there, because we would like you to answer that one. When you do some serious self-reflecting, and this question says, of course, your organization, but that could be also your city or your practice or the community you work in or the life you live. How would you rate your organization, and try to be as frank and honest as possible, okay? That's because probably everybody can do a little more than we think that we can. Is it a priority? Are you actively thinking about this? Are you working on it? Are you talking about it? Are you inviting people in to teach you? All right. Maybe you can come up already, Alain. Is that, yeah? Maybe we can talk about this a little. Alain Dekker. our next speaker from Groningen. I can say that word because we're both Dutch. That's nice. Intersectionality. What we have here, and I hope that the online participants were voting as well. If they are, they might change, still might change a little because they need a little more time to get here. All right, intersectionality is a 5.3, Alain Dekker. What do you think about that?
Well, it's an interesting figure. I don't know how it is for other countries, but for intellectual disabilities, care is often in different sectors. So there's
can we hear him well? Because I can't from this state. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, can you hear me? So
No. Be frank. Maybe a little. Can you go the sound a little up of Alain? Otherwise, it's a shame, right? If we don't hear you.
So maybe for the previous, the previous speakers, it's a shock. For me, it's not really a shock because in elderly care and intellectual disability care, there is often like a big gap, two different sectors of care, and of course we like to have cross-pollination between the two.
Yes, because it is. Yeah, it's about intersectionality.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, for people with intellectual disabilities, I think for most organizations it's maybe a 2 or a 3, or a 1 if they don't do anything about that. I hope for the other colleagues it's a little bit more like a 5.4, but still a way to go.
All right, still a way. But you know a lot about it because you really studied this this relation in dementia and
intellectual disabilities,
Down syndrome, things like that. A specialist, really. Right?
I hope to tell you a little bit more about that.
Tell us about what you know, please. Go ahead, Alain.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alain Dekker. I'm heading the Department of Practice-Oriented Scientific Research at Alliade, which is a large care organization in the north of the Netherlands, providing care to about 7,000 people with intellectual disabilities and vulnerable elderly. And in this organization, we have intellectual disability care and elderly care. And even for an organization like Alliade, it's difficult to really have that cross-pollination. So what I would like to do, and I would like to thank Alzheimer Europe for inviting me, because dementia is increasingly prevalent in people with intellectual disabilities. Also in regular care, in nursing homes, for instance, where a mild intellectual disability is often not recognized. And we could easily spend this entire Congress discussing this complex puzzle of dementia and intellectual disabilities, but I only have 15 minutes, so I will address 4 main questions about relevance, subgroups, and symptomatology. And I hope that after these 15 minutes, I have convinced you that dementia in people with intellectual disabilities should not be ignored. Let's see where the pointer is. Yes. So first of all, why is it relevant? Because people unfamiliar with this population often ask me, well, why do you really need a diagnosis in this population? Because they already receive care, so you can just adjust the care and, well, then it should be fine. Well, how better to answer this question than to ask the people themselves? With people with intellectual disability, that's often quite difficult. Sometimes they are not verbal or they do not have the intellectual capacity to answer this question. So we asked caregivers, their representatives, and also clinicians what the answer to that question would be, if they think it's relevant and why. By the way, I see many people taking photographs. Please do so, but don't hesitate to just send me an email and I will share the slides with you afterwards, as soon as I'm back home. The 2 main themes that emerged from this focus group study were, first of all, understanding. Understanding what's going on with these people. Why is behavior changing? That's the first reason. And the second one is making informed choices. People with intellectual disability depend on others. And if you know what's going on, you can adjust your care. So choices in care, for instance, the aims of the care, but also choices about treatment. In this population, depression and dementia is often confused and you might mistreat people. Managing expectations and perspective, for instance, advanced care planning, and also organizational choices and adjustments. To simplify it a bit for you, to introduce you to this topic, you can distinguish 3 main subgroups. And the first subgroup is the group with a mild intellectual disability. That's the majority of people with intellectual disabilities. IQ about 50 to 70 in all terms. The risk for dementia is more or less the same as in the general population or slightly higher. Slightly higher if the cognitive reserve hypothesis would be true. There was a nice poster about this, by the way. But so far, studies are not conclusive. The symptomatology is, well, fairly similar to the general population, although it's sometimes difficult to attribute changes to the intellectual disability or to the dementia. The second major group is people with Down syndrome, with a very high risk for the Alzheimer's type of dementia. About 3/4 of them will develop the disease. Earlier today there was a nice talk from Irish colleagues where it was even 88% prevalence. And the symptomatology, also prominent behavioral changes. Behavior is also very well observable by caregivers. And we study that in Down syndrome. And the third group, which is a rather neglected group so far, concern people with severe and profound intellectual disabilities, with again more or less the same risk as in the general population. And the main difference with symptomatology here is that it's very difficult to observe. These people often cannot talk at baseline, have sometimes no walking skills. So it depends on their baseline functioning, what symptoms you can observe and what not. And I will come back to that later. And finally, there are a few rare genetic syndromes with also an increased risk for dementia. So for all people with intellectual disabilities, all the different types of dementia are prevalent. In Down syndrome, it's particularly the Alzheimer's type, due to a genetic reason. And that is what I would like to show you here. Why does the group of people with Down syndrome have such a high risk to develop the disease? Well, here you see Jérôme Lejeune, a French geneticist, and he, Marthe Gauthier, and the team discovered that Down syndrome is due to a third copy of chromosome 21. And well, yeah, the negative side of that is that chromosome 21 encodes the well-known amyloid precursor protein, one of the two major hallmarks of the disease. So already from birth onwards, there's an overproduction of amyloid in this population, causing the plaques, the amyloid plaques, to form very early. And I know that in the current situation, also at this meeting, people sometimes question the relevance of amyloid, but Down syndrome is the group that demonstrates the essence of amyloid. You also need amyloid for this disease. And as I just said, for caregivers, because people with intellectual disabilities often rely on their caregivers, the cognitive decline, especially in Alzheimer's, where memory and learning deficits are predominant, it's more difficult to observe. For instance, not knowing the name of a new staff member. If you have difficulties with names anyway, you do not know if it's due to dementia or just due to the intellectual disability. And what we see is that in daily care, behavioral changes are very well observed by caregivers. So we wondered which behavioral changes are present in this population and might they be early symptoms. And then you get to the concept of behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia, BPSD. It's a kind of umbrella term for various behavioral alterations like anxiety, psychotic symptoms, eating and drinking problems, and apathy. And we wondered, well, how about people with Down syndrome? Which of these behavioral changes do they show? Well, and as often, there was not that much research about this, and the instruments that you use in the general population, like the well-known neuropsychiatric inventory, are not so useful for this population. So we interviewed caregivers and family members of over 500 people with intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, in 3 groups: without dementia, with a questionable dementia, which is a kind of MCI-like state, and a diagnosis of dementia by a clinician. And what we did is we compared the behavior in the last 6 months to their characteristic behavior before decline occurred. And that's a way of comparing the person with him or herself, so an intrapersonal change over time. And we depict it as follows. I hope you can see it in light gray below. You see the proportion of people in each group showing an increased frequency of that specific item. In white, no change, and in black, a decline, a decreased frequency. And what we found is that behavioral changes were really omnipresent in this population. Many, many behavioral alterations, and the 2 most predominant ones concern symptoms of anxiety and symptoms of apathy. Well, here you see various examples of those symptoms of anxiety, and in general you see the same pattern. The proportion of people in the Down syndrome group without dementia, only a small percentage shows an increase, while in the group with dementia it's going up to 50% of the group showing an increase in symptoms of anxiety. And interestingly, in the intermediate group, so the group with questionable dementia, already 1/3 to about 25% of the people showed an increase. So it might be an early symptom. Unfortunately, this was a cross-sectional study, so we could not confirm this longitudinally yet, but it appears that an increase in anxiety might be an early signal for dementia, and with the dementia it's very common. A similar pattern is seen for apathy. Again, rather limited increase in the group with Down syndrome without dementia, strong increases in the group with Alzheimer's disease dementia diagnosis to even over 70% for the fourth item. And again, the questionable group is in between. So again, with an increase of apathy, caregivers think, what's going on? Maybe we should alarm a clinician. And luckily, also earlier today, people with Down syndrome get more and more attention in dementia research. But there is a group of people within the large group of people with intellectual disabilities that is still ignored. And people with severe and profound intellectual disabilities so far have hardly been looked at. That group, well, the natural history of the dementia in that group was not well studied so far, and the instruments are of no use. This is a group that often cannot speak, a group that has limited motor skills, and you really rely on others that know these people very well to be able to observe a change. So what we did to still find out how can we diagnose the disease in this population is to study literature, qualitative studies, focus groups and interviews, and quantitative studies, surveys, clinical record examination, and also study existing skills. And by combining all these different results, triangulation, we found a pattern of symptoms that finally resulted in a new diagnostic aid. And this new diagnostic aid was launched last month in Dutch, and is free of charge, and we intend to also translate it to other languages. If you are interested, please send me an email. You will find it on the last slide, my email address, to also be able to really have a good inventory of symptoms in this population. Main conclusion for that population is that you see the same domains of symptoms as in the general population, so declining cognition, declining activities of daily living, behavioral changes, motor decline, but the observability is different. So caregivers observe it in specific contexts like nursing and eating and drinking moments. It strongly depends on their baseline skills, so you need to know the baseline skills of these people to be able to establish a change, if it's really possibly due to dementia or if it's already part of the disability. And that requires very close observation. And this very close observation is of great essence. You cannot expect major changes in these people. They are very subtle. Maybe the intensity of their sounds will change, or the limited motor skills that declines a little bit. But you really have to focus very closely to be able to establish those changes. So to summarize, because we only briefly introduce you into the topic today, is that the increased life expectancy of people with intellectual disabilities make dementia more prevalent in this group, also in regular nursing homes, for instance, mainly mild intellectual disabilities that is often not recognized. It's relevant to have a diagnosis also in this population. So if you question the relevance of a diagnosis, please ask people in intellectual disability care, because they really need this to understand and make informed choices. And we can distinguish 3 different, somewhat simplified, I admit, subgroups: mild intellectual disabilities, fairly similar to the general population; Down syndrome, very high prevalence of Alzheimer's disease and prominent behavioral changes; and thirdly, people with severe and profound intellectual disabilities, which has been a neglected group so far, and we've done some recent work about that by making an inventory of symptoms, how to observe it, and to facilitate this, we developed a diagnostic aid that is now freely available. And with that, I would like to end. Please send me an email if you would like to have the slides or the instrument. And I hope that after this 15 minutes, I have convinced you that this population should not be ignored, and that the title of this conference, Dementia Care, Policy and Research, is also applicable to this population. They also deserve good dementia care, policy and research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alain. I'm sure that you can already tick that box. It's mission accomplished. I think that message was heard very loud and clear. Just a question for you as well. You are here presenting about intellectual disability at an Alzheimer's conference.
Yes.
How often do you present about Alzheimer's disease at an intellectual disability conference? And what would be, in your opinion, the first priority? Which of the organizations, do intellectual disability organizations need to become more dementia friendly, or do we all need to become more intellectual disability friendly, or both?
I think both, because in intellectual disability care, we are very well, let's say, used to caregiving, supervising people based on behavior, so also the welfare of people, while especially in the Netherlands, the elderly care traditionally has been more medicalized. But the intellectual disability care sector does not have a great tradition in those medical aspects from which they can learn a lot from elderly care. So the cross-pollination between the two, I strongly recommend. And I hope that at Alzheimer Europe meetings like this population gets more attention, but also the other way around, that at intellectual disability meetings, we discuss all the great initiatives that we've seen at this meeting also.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very much.
So we've really had a whistle tour of underrepresented populations that really deserve more attention within our dementia movement. And we think we've had fantastic speakers. We now have our last speaker, and again, talking about an underrepresented population, we're looking at socio-economically disadvantaged group. And here today we have Päivi Topo. She's the ombudsperson for elderly people here in Finland, but she also has a very long and distinguished career in aging policy organizations and research organizations. I think you were also the director of the Age Institute, which a lot of people may be familiar here. But Päivi, we look really forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, and I'm very pleased to see so many people here, because I know that you have had a long day already. I was giving, and thank you very much for this opportunity to give this talk. The topic of the talk is actually rather difficult. How to better support people living with dementia from socio-economically disadvantaged groups. As we have heard here, there is a lot of intersectionality among this group as well. But here I have only 15 minutes to go, so I'm really talking this topic in a general level. When I was invited to give this talk, I was also invited to say something about the Ombudsman for Older People in Finland by the Alzheimer's Society Finland. And I'm very pleased to do that as well. The reason why I was asked to do this is that this is rather a new task here in Finland. The Ombudsman for Older People is an autonomous and independent authority that promotes the realization of the rights and best interest of older persons. And as you can understand, the rights of people with dementia are very crucial in this work. There is a legislation behind of the task of Ombudsman, and I just want to pick up a couple of things there. Our task is to monitor legislation and decision making in the society and assess the effects on the older people. For example, today I had an oral hearing in the Parliament about the residential care, and of course what we talk about the position of people with dementia. On Thursday, I will have a next hearing. It is about costs of medicines and reimbursement of medication, and of course, when we talk about the costs of dementia medication, for example. But altogether, what is very important in our work is to focus on people, on older adults with low income, low education, because there is a tendency that they have more challenges than other groups, and the decision making can make their life easier or even more challenging. The second point I would like to pick up is that we have a right to make initiatives and state opinions and participate in social discussion. And the last point I would like to raise is that our task is to promote cooperation between those who handle matters related to the older people and actors who represent the older people. And as you can imagine, Alzheimer's Finland is an important partner for us. However, the Ombudsman does not have the authority to resolve issues related to older individuals, and that is a very strong restriction there. Because this is the first term we have an Ombudsman in Finland, it was my first task to set goals for the first 5 years period, and I want to focus on combating ageism, to promote health promotion activities, which are extremely important. I'm talking about that here today as well, to raise awareness about the need for further investments in elderly care, the challenges of access to care, that is also a topic I will talk here, and to promote the rights of older adults in digitalized societies. And again, it is a third topic I'm also mentioning here. So this is just so you can see that during the first year, quite many activities has been ongoing. I think we won't have time to go this through, but anyway, at least you can see what we do. So now about this topic. We know that the risk for dementia are higher in lower socioeconomic groups, and there are many reasons behind of that. But one of them is stress caused by inadequate material resources, and the other reason is that unhealthy lifestyle factors are more common among people with low income. And these two have been found to be linked to increased risk for memory disorders and dementia. In health promotion activities, we are often more successful in raising the interest of higher socioeconomic groups rather than those who could benefit the most. And that is why I'm talking about the promotion of brain health here. And the third point is that socioeconomic inequities in receiving services and care are also very present in European countries, not only in Finland. So when we talk about, when we think about the promotion of brain health, I think the main issue, the main question we should make is what we can learn from the other health promotion activities that have been successful in reaching people in socio-economically disadvantaged groups. And here is the figure. I think many of you are very familiar with it. It's from the finger study. And there is the recommendation what we should do to be able to promote brain health. And you can see that there is nutrition, physical exercises, cognitive training, social relations. I have difficulties in seeing what there are, so I hope that you see it better. And then there is this more medical issue, check the cardiovascular values. So we should be able to promote all of them, but if we can promote at least one of them, we have done something which is it is positive. But how to do this in a way that that it invites that people with lower education, lower income find these activities also inviting. Here's a list. It is based on quite a lot of literature and I think also common sense, but also development activities. The findings of the development projects. So you should to be able to raise the interest and to reach the people with low income, especially but also with low education, it's important to collaborate between the voluntary organizations, public social and healthcare services, and public service providers for physical activities. So if you can build up a network of these different actors, it is much more easier to raise the interest of people with low income. You should also organize activities as close to the homes of people with low income as possible. You should use the printed information and deliver it to homes of people. No participation fees, that is a very strong recommendation. No or very low other costs and no requirements for specific skills to participate in these activities. Also, transportation is a big issue, at least in Finland, but I think it must be also in other European countries. So if you can offer free transportation to activities, then you will be more successful. And it's never, we should never forget the time for a cup of tea, cup of coffee, time for chat. This social factor is really crucial. It has been shown in several studies that if we want to promote health, we should build up positive social relations there. Group activities and peer support are very crucial here as well, and involving participants in planning the content of the activities is really important, because we need to find the language and expressions which are familiar for them and inviting for them as well. So we should avoid to medical language and that kind of expressions which require more education, more abilities to understand scientific knowledge or something like that. When we talk about people with low income, low education, we should not forget the accessibility in virtual health promotion activities, and this considers also virtual care services. There should be possibilities to participate in web-based activities that require no digital skills, and that is something we should not forget. Digital skills are rarer among older adults with lower socioeconomic groups than other older adults, and that is, I think, that is the fact in all European countries. At least in Finland, there are big differences between these groups. Provision of digital tools with no cost is also an opportunity that we should use, and the availability of personal support in the use of digital tools is also important. But most important is that older adults find the activities interesting and beneficial, and then they are motivated to learn to use the new tools. This is just one example. We don't have time to go this through, but I just want to sort of like convince you that it is possible. This is about the work done in the Age Institute in Finland. There has been a quite long-term work in developing a service model on online exercise for older adults, and it has been successful in reaching people with low income, people with no digital skills. And the results are rather good. This is about promotion of balance and promotion of strength. So it is part of this finger model, if you think about it as a big system. So, but then this even much more difficult issue, which is how to ensure better access to care of older adults living with dementia in socially disadvantaged groups. And there are many issues which should be done to ensure that they have better access than today. And this is just also a recommendation, a list of recommendations. We should provide knowledge. Knowledge is extremely important about memory disorders and possibilities for treatment in a familiar language, in a familiar channels. And in a face-to-face situations. We should also pay attention on how we could decrease the costs of getting diagnosed to improve access to diagnostic services, how we can decrease the costs of medicine, the cost of care and assistant. We also should underline the importance of providing help in navigating in a rather complex care system to improve the access to care. And the last point, we need to provide information about care services and social security system and how to apply social security benefits. And here the familiar language is extremely important, and face-to-face services to ensure that people have access to the social security benefits they have right to. Then the last point, this is not about groups, only about people with low income, low education. But this is about everyone who does not have a social network and who has problems with cognition. I think this is something we should never forget. At least in Finland, it is getting more and more common that people in old age live alone, and many people don't have family relations, no friends. So it is very important that we all the time try to identify these people to help them in access to care and assistance. And this concerns all the socio-economic groups. Thank you very much.
Maybe you can stay, and maybe we can invite the other speakers as well, so to get up on these chairs, and then there's the time for you to ask them your questions, because we have that time. But maybe, Jean, you want to go first, right?
With a question.
You usually want to be first. So take your time to think of what you want to say or ask. And yes, people are jumping up and running, but no, we have time. Let's spend it. Yeah, there's somebody with a question there. But Jean's first. Go ahead.
No,
okay. There we go.
Feel free to ask the audience first.
Question fire.
Oh, it's a burning question from Joost van Hoof, the Netherlands, for Dr. Topo. About how many people are we speaking? Do you know a percentage of people in Finland, all the people in Finland who have this lower education, lower income position? Is it 1/6 as in the Netherlands, or is it less or more?
Well, that is a very good question, because it's really about it's a question about the definition, how we define this. I don't know what is. I think it is in English income decile, maybe. Yes. Okay. So we know that the more advanced age the person is, the more likely he belongs to the lowest two income deciles. Mm. So meaning simply that the risk for low income increases by age at the moment.
Yes. Yeah, we should find out how we don't know really what the difference is between. All right. Yes, Kevin, go ahead. Do you want to stand or do you want to sit?
I'd sit.
Okay.
I want to compliment each and every one of you on an amazing, absolutely amazing talks. And there's so much I wanted to say, but is it Alain? Down syndrome community, I come from a small rural community of about 2,800, and there's a very high prevalence of people with Down syndrome there. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I can tell you is we can learn a lot from them on what love is about. Yes. They are such beautiful people. And our local supermarket, if you want low sodium soy sauce, you don't go to the so-called normal people, go to the people with Down syndrome that are working there because they know everything. But one slide that struck me was your slide on anxious symptoms frequency. Mm-hmm. And I would like you to think about this. As a person living with Lewy body dementia, I tick every one of those boxes 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Every one of
all
those
the time.
Boxes. All the time.
Yes.
So it was frightening to see it.
That's the same. And
thank you.
And I thank you. I think that you were saying that it's so very hard to see a difference sometimes, and there's not a big variation. You need observation to find the difference, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And as you said, thank you very much. I think there are more comparisons between people with intellectual disabilities and the general population and differences, although we tend to separate it.
Yeah.
So like also what you said about the people with Down syndrome, we can learn from them, and that care sector can learn from elderly care. And yeah, I hope that we can all together stimulate this cross-pollination, as Jean referred to 15 minutes ago.
Yes, so we have another question here. I was deliberating about her, that she could, you're able to stand.
I was trying to, of course I'm able to stand, but I didn't necessarily want to, but I'm being bullied into doing so.
You're forced, yes.
This is a question specifically for Karan. We at Alzheimer Scotland, and the board specifically, are trying to embed inclusivity, diversity and so on into our framework. And I just wanted some advice from you as to how to make sure that we embed that at every level of the organisation. And where do you foresee the challenges that we as a board may face in making sure that that's implemented? Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Thank you.
I think that's possibly a conversation to sit down and have. But the question I've got, so in developing the framework, has that been done in consultation with various different groups of people?
We hired a consultant, and we've more or less finished the engagement with the consultant, and it's been helpful, but it's been very expensive, and we're probably at the limit of what we as a board had agreed to spend on that. And so it's an issue that certainly I, who was the person in charge of that project, really wants to see brought to its absolute logical conclusion. So I'm happy
we would like some advice
right
now.
Yeah, some advice, please. Although I'm happy, very happy, if you would be willing to have a conversation later.
Yes, but maybe a word of advice for everyone. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think at that point then it would need conversations with various groups of people to have an influence in that framework in some way, shape or form, because in my experience something gets developed and then we try to adapt it for certain communities and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, so it's about doing that at the very beginning and having that value base at the beginning and making those interactions with various different community groups, and we'll have a conversation about that, sure.
Trial, error, communication, like that. All right,
and
thank you. Yeah, and all the layers. That's important what you say. Yes, John.
Can I just also ask a question, because what you mentioned the economic question as well. This will cost money. And I think Linn put it very succinctly. You cannot have good person-centered care without a staff that is being funded and a staff that is valued. Is that the same for all other priority areas, for your area, for people with intellectual disability? Is it the economic arguments that makes this the most difficult, or are there other underlying difficulties that you encounter?
Well, ladies first.
Bless. Yeah, no, it's definitely an area of concern within ethnic minorities, because the first port of call comes down to funding. And how we get those resources to raise awareness about dementia. I mean, we've got difficulties in people even understanding what dementia is before we even get them to the door and then try to offer them services. So there's definitely an issue around funding and under-resourced areas. So people will say things like, when we run a carer support group, why is it in the local community centre over the other, place out there? So I think it's across the board, and I agree with what you were saying as well. A radical change is needed in dementia care overall.
All right, thanks so much. Yeah, we have another question here. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for Dr. Topo.
A little closer. Yeah.
Jacqueline Hoogenam from the Ministry of Health in the Netherlands. As we had a presentation yesterday on, among others, the question whether dementia is a disability. And it was a Finnish presenter who stated that in Finland, older persons with dementia don't get enough services from the Social Welfare Act. They get any services from the Elder Care Act. And the Disability Services Act says you have the wrong age and the wrong disability. So she stated that in Finland, people with dementia get lost in a sort of Bermuda Triangle.
And you want to know if she says that's true?
Do you recognize this?
Yeah.
And if so, can you do something about it, being an ombudsman?
Yeah, ombudswoman person.
Thank you very much. That is a very good question.
Yeah.
And I think that the reality is not so dark as you say, but there definitely are problems. And that the challenge is that at the moment we are having a political discussion about whether people in all ages are able to get services as a part of Disability Act. So that is the big political debate at the moment. And it will be, I hope, a very hot topic because we need a lot of pressure to improve the situation.
All right, yes.
But about these resources, whether this is an economical question, I think we should also think about the costs of care for the people themselves, for the people with dementia, for people with cognitive disability challenges. And that is another aspect of this whole discussion, and we should talk more about this
resources,
as well.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. We have another question here from Jan Steyaert.
Yes, a question that's been nagging me throughout your presentations. 4 great presentations, 4 groups of persons with dementia with special need that we all want to work with and for. But I'm wondering, how do we avoid those groups being crushed under a more generic question that we are facing, which is more people with dementia, less people in the workforce, less money available, no plans for building extra nursing homes. How do we avoid those groups being crushed under that bigger issue?
A real big issue where it might draw all the attention away. Yeah. Yes, please. Who wants to respond? It's for all of you.
Well, for people with intellectual disabilities, maybe the lucky side about that is that there is also specialized intellectual disability care. So either you can go through that route or through elderly care. But I do not fully agree with the point that funding always, let's say, limits action, even with limited resources. The study that we did was just 4 care organizations working together with very limited resources, not consultants or so, just doing it together, asking the people what it is all about. And we could do very, very much. We could raise awareness, we could develop the right thing. And it's sometimes just a matter of to what do you allocate your budget? Are you doing what works and not doing what not works, or are you doing everything? And even with all the knowledge we have already, I think we can make evidence-based choices and make steps without saying, we need more funding or we need more staff, because that's reality, it's not there.
So, and Linn, what do you think about this? It's a major problem, more patients, less workforce. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, I've been working in care, and like, people can stretch themselves, and I'm sure that like there are always possibilities for finding ways. The way I want to point to this is that there has been like a great austerity politics in terms of elder care in general and in dementia care, and like throughout Europe. And I mean, like, this is a political decisions that we're making, and then we're claiming that person-centered care should be the hallmark of best care, but at the same time, we're asking people in very precarious work conditions to sort of like implement this, implement that. So I mean, I acknowledged what you're saying about the possibilities of doing great work, and people are doing great work.
But what do you think of his concern, Jan's concern?
I'm not quite sure if I understood the question. Being crushed.
Being crushed under that huge problem that is the increase of patients with dementia, the workforce that is so small, just a complete...
but we have a political situation also in Europe where we try to shut the borders and saying people shouldn't be coming to Europe. And this is the workforce that are actually working with people with dementia. So again, there are political kind of, you know, I think we have to...
Will attention for these different groups maybe lower because of the big problem that we're facing?
Sorry, I didn't hear you now.
Maybe, Jean, can you translate?
Yeah, it's a big problem. We need to deal with dementia care as a whole issue. And if all the focus is on dementia care, how do we make sure that these underrepresented populations are not forgotten?
Yes.
I think the term was crushed, but I think how do you make sure that they're not forgotten
exactly
when we are campaigning for a change in dementia care?
Well, I think one of the things that are like really important is the representation in different kind of contexts. So I mean, like when people ask, for example, how can we include people in research? How can we work more with this community? I mean, having long-term sustainable relationships and taking time, because like, for example, trans people, they have, I mean, lack of trust in authorities in research because they've been facing many sort of difficult situations throughout their life. So, I mean, it takes time to build trust with certain communities, and it goes the same when it comes to sort of minority. And like one of the things, I mean, intersectionality, and we're talking about that now, is a term that came from the black feminist Kimberly Crenshaw. So like when we're talking about intersectionality, we're talking about power relations. We're not talking about just this diversity, including people into sort of a room of white people, or including sort of, you know, queers into heteronormative spaces, but actually challenging some of the premises of that. So I think that's kind of, you know, for me, something quite different from just talking about diversity or inclusivity.
All right, yes. Okay,
Karan
thank you.
Well?
Thank you, yeah. So we have to wrap up.
Sorry, I just wanted to also just highlight that in each of our talks we've spoken about different groups of people and remind people to not categorise based on communities and groups. You could have one person who's diagnosed with dementia, has an intellectual disability, is from an ethnic minority community, LGBTQ+, and from a socially economic deprived area. And we need to find a way to meet those needs for people. And that's what intersectionality is about. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
Thanks so much.
And maybe just also like one conclusion also from my side.
Yeah.
We started yesterday. The first plenary was from people with dementia, by people with dementia, talking. And it was Chris who said, nothing about us without all of us.
Exactly.
And I think that wasn't necessarily what he had in mind. This intersectionality was not what he had necessarily in mind. But I think for us as an organization moving forward, this slogan should really be turned into something that's a call for action, that if we move forward, we can only move forward if all sectors of society move forward with us. And I like this idea of calling for revolution dementia care, because I think that's really needed.
Thank you, good conclusion, yes. So, there are more sessions coming up?
Yeah,
there are two
because
or three at 5:30, yep.
We'll meet again tomorrow because we have another session on new opportunities, but there's two more sessions or three more sessions. One quick oral presentations on brain health and prevention. We have two special symposia, one by FPR on national dementia strategies, and the other one is by Fondation Médéric Alzheimer about psychosocial interventions, a European perspective.
Yes,
there's still a lot to do and more tomorrow.
We'll see you at the hashtag and just give your comments. Thank you.